Well, hey folks, welcome to Profiling Evil. Richard Allen has now been convicted of the brutal murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German in the Delphi case, a trial that heavily relied on circumstantial evidence. It ignited a fierce debate about justice and wrongful convictions. While some people believe Allen was unfairly framed, the jury found evidence convincing beyond a reasonable doubt. So let's examine the details that swayed the jury, including contested forensic evidence and Allen's disturbing behavior and confessions while in custody. We're going to talk about physical, forensic, eyewitness, and behavioral evidence, how it played crucial roles in securing this high-stakes conviction based on circumstantial evidence. Well, welcome and thanks for watching Profiling Evil. Please take a moment to hit that like and subscribe button, and please ring the bell so that you get all of our videos and you get notifications on videos just like this one. Now, Richard Allen's conviction in the Delphi murders is a landmark moment in the quest for justice for Abby Williams and Libby German, two young teens who vanished on February 13, 2017. During a hike near Delphi, Indiana. The next day, the girls' bodies were found near the Monon High Bridge, and haunting clues were left with audio capturing a man who became known as Bridge Guy, ordering the girls down the hill. Despite this unsettling evidence, the case would remain unsolved for years to come. In October 2022, after more than 5 years of leads and dead ends, 52-year-old Richard Allen was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder, along with 2 additional counts for committing murder in the course of kidnapping. Prosecutors argued that Allen was in fact Bridge Guy, and over the course of the 3-week trial, they pieced together a case built largely on circumstantial evidence, attempting to tie Allen to the murders through a series of indirect but interconnecting clues. You know, I've watched a number of friends of mine in the YouTube community, defense attorneys by trade, who have talked about this case almost every single night. They've shared all the reasons why Richard Allen wouldn't be found guilty, and they amassed a following of like-minded viewers who think the now convicted killer was set up by police. They feel the police botched the investigation, and they feel that Allen was wrongly treated throughout the entire process. They've challenged the way in which the judges handled the case. They're convinced that Richard Allen's confinement in a correctional facility, in questionable circumstances I might add, led to his confessions to do something that he really didn't ever do. One attorney who I've really enjoyed being on court TV with even attended this trial in seating that was arranged by the defense team. Now, while people might rightly complain that the prosecution gets opportunities early on for perp walks and other things to influence potential jurors, this trial has shown that defense advocates also play a substantial role in sharing all the reasons why a juror should walk away from the case with reasonable doubt. I'd like to read your comments down below about your thoughts on this particular thing. This one is going to be interesting to see what happens down the road here. Now, Allen's trial was presided over by Superior Court Judge Fran Golem. Many people challenged whether she should have remained there. The trial began on October 18th and was marked by a blend of physical, forensic, eyewitness, and behavioral evidence. The jury was composed of 7 women and 5 men. They were sequestered. They deliberated for like 19 hours a day before reaching the verdict just this week. Now, they convicted Allen on all counts. And I don't know about you, but I was really impressed with the efficiency that Judge Gold showed in moving this case along. Whether there are legal challenges or not, I'm not equipped to answer. Now, many believe that Allen's confessions, some 60 of them, are what led to his conviction. But central to this case was physical evidence and the tool mark analysis, along with his confession. So I want to talk about physical evidence and tool marks. Central to the prosecution's case was the unspent bullet found between the girls' bodies, which forensic experts testified had been cycled through Richard Allen's .40 caliber Sig Sauer handgun. Now, although tool mark analysis is a forensic science that's faced scrutiny, the prosecution argued that the bullet provided a direct link to Allen because it was in his gun. He said nobody's used it. They presented this as crucial physical evidence, and the state trooper testified that the bullet's unique marks were tied directly to Allen's weapon. Now, the defense tried to counter with a bunch of challenges, but in the end, it appears that the jury believed the prosecution expert over defense rebuttals. Let's talk about forensic and digital evidence. Now, remember, Libby's cell phone contained both audio and video evidence, capturing a man's voice ordering the girls, quote, down the hill, and a blurry visual of a man later associated with Allen. A state trooper testified that Allen's voice was identified as that same voice in Libby's recording, further cementing the state's argument. Now, additionally, security footage on the day of the murders recorded Allen's vehicle near the crime scene, placing him in proximity to the crime at a critical time. Again, the defense argued the timeline, and what was projected in media reports had me actually wondering if the state missed something. But again, in the end, the jury believed the state's position and disregarded the defense rebuttal. Many of you may not have, and you can certainly weigh in below, but let's be kind to each other. But let's not forget about those eyewitness accounts. Eyewitness testimony placed Allen near the bridge on the day of the crime. He admitted to being there. Various witnesses described seeing a man who matched Allen's general appearance, though none explicitly identified him as bridge guy, except one kind of. These accounts were indirect, but they strengthened the timeline that places Allen on the Monon High Bridge Trail shortly before the murders, enhancing this circumstantial case that was built against him. And don't forget, Richard Allen admitted that he was on the Monon High Bridge Trail that day, on the day of the murders. Now, although challenged about her changing testimony, the jury apparently believed the witness who suggested she saw a muddy and bloody Richard Allen, who she believed to be Richard Allen, on the trail. And even though she didn't specifically say it was him and pointed at him, she believed it was him. But behavioral evidence and confessions are huge in this case. Prosecutors presented evidence of Allen's behavioral changes and his confessions. Now, during his time in solitary confinement, Allen allegedly confessed up to 60 times to the killings in conversations with prison guards, his psychologist, and even written notes to the warden. They have phone conversations of him with his wife and his mother. Allen reportedly told his wife, "I did it. I killed Abby and Libby." Now, these statements were contested by the defense, who argued that Allen's mental health had deteriorated under the extreme conditions of solitary confinement, leaving the guy in a state of delirium and psychosis that could have influenced these admissions. But what was clear in the end of this trial is that the jury didn't believe the defense narrative that Richard Allen was confessing to something he didn't do. They believed he confessed to something he did do. Now, Allen's defense team was led by attorney Bradley Rossi, arguing that the state's case was built on junk science and unreliable evidence. Well, apparently the jury bought it. They challenged the tool mark analysis as inconclusive and questioned the reliability of Allen's confessions, citing mental health expert testimony that Allen's mental state in confinement was severely compromised. Furthermore, they argued that no DNA evidence or any other physical evidence directly tied Allen to the crime scene, casting doubt on the sufficiency of the state's circumstantial evidence case. One of the defense's strongest arguments questioned the timeline and the locations associated with the murders. A digital forensic expert testified that Libby's cell phone had been plugged into the headphones or an auxiliary cable nearly 5 hours after the prosecution proposed the time of death. Now, this suggests that somebody might have tampered with the phone, potentially casting doubt on the assumption that the girls were left in the woods at 2:32 p.m. when they vanished. Didn't answer any other questions, and the state really didn't come back and answer any. But in the prosecution's final argument, despite defense efforts, the prosecution argued that Allen's confessions contained details that only the killer would know, such as the specifics of the girls' injuries. This was a huge moment for the prosecution, in my opinion. Again, only the killer would know certain specifics, including the location of the girls' injuries. This is why investigators have to keep things close to the vest in these cases, only sharing them at the right moment and using them to either impeach someone or to corroborate something. You know, they presented Allen as a manipulative predator who blended into the Delphi community to avoid suspicion, living and working throughout his time in Delphi. Closing arguments emphasized that Allen's actions and statements matched the crime's profile, from his proximity to the crime scene to his possession of the weapon tied directly to the crime scene. In the end, the jury found Allen guilty of all charges. Now, his sentencing is scheduled for December, and it could result in up to 130 years in prison. A gag order remains in effect until the sentencing, and Allen's team is certainly expected to appeal this finding. In the end, it was circumstantial evidence that pushed the jury over the line in determining Richard Allen's guilt of murder. There's no question there were a number of legal issues that will probably continue to keep this case in the appeals process for years to come. But this jury felt beyond a reasonable doubt that Richard Allen killed Abby and Libby. So, I want to close with this idea that circumstantial evidence can be highly compelling because, while it doesn't necessarily prove a fact, it builds a logical framework that can create a convincing picture of what happened. When multiple pieces of circumstantial evidence align to support a single inference, they reinforce each other and can make a case stronger. Sometimes as powerful or even more convincing than direct evidence. And I believe that's what happened in this case. And here are some of the reasons why circumstantial evidence can be so compelling. Let's start with logical consistency and patterns. You see, when several circumstances and facts fit together logically and support the same conclusion, it can create a chain of reasoning that seems inescapable. For example, Richard Allen was on the Monon High Bridge on the day of the murders. He said he was on the road. He resembles Bridge Guy from the video. Richard Allen had similar clothing. According to one witness, Richard Allen resembled a man she saw on the trail who was muddy and bloody. Richard Allen had a weapon that the state expert testified matched an unspent cartridge recovered between the bodies of the two victims. And Richard Allen confessed more than 60 times that he committed the murders while providing information that only the killer would know. These fit a pattern of logical consistency, although I'm sure my defense attorney friends, and perhaps many of you, would disagree with that. Circumstantial evidence is also important in volume and detail. A single piece of circumstantial evidence might be weak on its own, but when there are multiple points that all indicate the same outcome, the collective weight of these facts becomes much more persuasive. A plus B equals C. Just like I outlined above, there were many things that linked up amongst the differing forms of evidence. In short, this case wasn't built on a single form of evidence, but on all of the evidence being forged together, and it apparently formed a convincing argument for the jury to say he's guilty of murder. You know, behavior and motive is really important in circumstantial cases. Circumstantial evidence often reflects behavioral patterns and motivations that resonate with jurors and judges. I've mentioned behavior many times as the fifth form of evidence, and it can really tie cases together. We got to talk about reliability compared to some direct evidence, because direct evidence like eyewitness testimony can sometimes be flawed due to human error, bias, circumstances. Circumstantial evidence often involves physical traces or corroborative documentation, the phone records, surveillance footage, eyewitnesses on the thing. They're much more reliable and less prone to manipulation. And we have to talk about inference and real life reasoning. People naturally make inferences from circumstantial evidence in everyday life. For instance, if you hear a barking dog and broken glass, you might infer that a break-in's occurring somewhere. You didn't see it happen, but you can certainly infer it. Courts recognize such inferences are based on reasonable, common sense interpretations of reality, which can be very persuasive. And there has to be this synergy of all the different forms of evidence. Circumstantial evidence often intertwines with direct evidence, strengthening the entire case. To avoid repetition, think back to my comments from earlier on about circumstantial pieces of evidence that point to Richard Allen as the killer, something that the jury agreed to, evidenced by their finding of guilt on 4 counts of murder. In summary, the circumstantial evidence becomes compelling because it builds a narrative through logical connections. It often includes multiple interlocking pieces of information that point to a single conclusion. The conviction of Richard Allen underscores the potential power of circumstantial evidence in the absence of direct forensic proof. This case, defined by forensic evidence, physical evidence, eyewitness and admissions or confessions, and behavioral evidence, highlights the layers of inference that can lead to a guilty verdict. While some people are hailing this as an overdue justice, others are going to question the reliance on circumstantial connections. The Delphi case serves as a sobering reminder of the complexities of the criminal justice system and how even after years of time, a conviction can be built from a seemingly indirect thread that's been woven into a persuasive narrative. And hats off to the prosecution for doing that. Hey, I'd like your comments on this case, and I'd like to know how you're feeling after the guilty verdict of Richard Allen for killing Abby and Libby. Hey, please be kind in your comments and recognize, like Judge Gould said before the verdict was announced, there's going to be unhappy people on both sides of this decision. Richard Allen's wife uttered, "This isn't over," as she left the courthouse.
Isn't over at all.
That was after her husband was convicted, and I suspect she's right. And I hope you'll join us as we continue to follow this landmark case when Richard Allen gets sentenced in December. Remember, he faces sentencing on 4 murder charges, each demanding 45-plus year sentences. Some people say 130 years. 4 times 45 is more like 160. I don't know. But remember, you can find Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And make sure you're checking out Profiling Evil's audio podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. And while you're out surfing around, check out Profiling Evil's website at profilingevil.com, and make sure you sign up for the BOLO, our digital newsletter. And keep in mind, Christmas is rapidly approaching, so I hope you'll consider purchasing one of my books on our website. If you've already purchased them for yourself, consider giving them as a gift to a true crime lover. I mean, how cool is this that you can actually get a book personalized for Christmas by the author? I'm happy to do it, and I'll ship it anywhere in the U.S. free of charge. So keep in mind too, if you'd like to donate toward our efforts of Profiling Evil, you can do so by clicking on this QR code or the link below. And thanks for helping us out financially. It really does help. Hey folks, we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.